I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. She is the author of the book It's Only Embarrassing If You Are Embarrassed. No other than Miss Madison Daniels. Hello, Miss Madison.
Hey Daniel, how are you today?
I'm fabulous like you.
I'm
Thank
so glad to hear it.
yes, thank you for your time for my podcast.
Of course, I'm excited to be here. Big fan of the show, and so excited to share a little bit on here today.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about your latest book, right?
Y-
Embarrassing.
Yeah. So I recently published a book called It's Only Embarrassing If You're Embarrassed. And I really just went through this really just kind of bad downward spiral of life where I had a drinking problem, was, experimenting with a lot of drugs, was in a marriage that had kind of been going downhill. And then that kind of all came to a head in 2020. And my father actually passed away from COVID at the end of 2020. And I was actually the one that had gotten COVID, and kind of given it to everybody unknowingly. And so I end up in this position where, my dad's passed away from COVID, and I feel like it's my fault. And so I end up in, this spot where I am really heavily relying on alcohol, drugs, pills, whatever I can kind of get my hands on. It leads to this just really unhealthy, downward spiral that I'm in for a couple years. During this time, I actually end up in a spot where I am, getting divorced. I've lost a ton of friends. I have completely turned my back on God. And then I eventually start to, I have kind of a couple spiritual awakenings, and I start to give God a try. I start to give faith a try. And I, give up my addictions. I get into AA, and my life just kind of miraculously changes. But while I'm going through this, I am, really just in so much pain. And I have a lot of this pain, around shame. I think that I've been through so many just embarrassing things. I think my life, has been so challenging. I think I have, all these secrets that I think, are just so terrible. And so I finally realized, it's only embarrassing if you're embarrassed. And I start to kind of embrace that, like, hey, everybody has their story for a reason. And so I actually started my book as a diary. That's how
Oh,
you know
wow.
it's pretty juicy. So I was in this spot, I'm just in so much pain. And I'm like, hey, how do I kind of move through this pain? And so I decide I'm just going to like start a Word doc, brain dump everything that I'm going through, everything that I'm feeling. And as I'm going through this, I, kind of get these pings of like, okay, what if you turned it into a book and you went back and, unpacked these different spirals, and then you went back and you gave advice to your younger self, or you shared like how you felt then versus what you've learned now. And that's what I ended up doing. And so basically each chapter of the book, it unpacks a spiral that I went through. So it opens with the dead dad spiral, then it goes into the divorce spiral. I talk about losing my dad, getting divorced, losing friends. I talk about finally getting into therapy, getting my life back on track. I talk about my addiction, how I got into AA. And honestly, it's really just kind of like a brain dump of kind of the hardest years of my life. And then really just trying to normalize that for others. Because whenever I was in this, state of my life, I felt so alone because I felt like I was the only one that had been through these things. I felt like I was the only one that had these problems. And in reality, there's really no new problems. And by just being open and honest about your problems, sharing those with others, and using those to, help others get through the same things, you're really able to heal. So that's a little bit of a Cliff Notes version of kind of what my book is about and how it came to fruition.
Interesting, Miss Madison. That Misko is your uh related to you, or you just friends to
Great
wrote
question. Yeah.
wrote this book?
Yeah. So I actually ended up self-publishing my book. And so through Barnes and Noble, they actually have this resource where if you want to self-publish, you can reach out to different people that will do the illustration for your book, that will edit your book. You can kind of have all these vendors. And so Zuza was actually the person that did the cover of the book. And so she was the vendor that I worked with to do the cover design of the book. And then I also had somebody that edited the book as well. So I wrote the book and then kind of worked with these other people that are, really good in their respects to make sure that the book was, edited properly and then to make sure that the cover was, just fun and brought to life in a way that I couldn't have done.
Interesting, Miss Madison. So it's only embarrassing if you're embarrassed. What is the best highlight?
Oh, okay. I would say I talk really candidly about my addiction in here. And so I'll tell you the story of how I got into AA. And so I had been going through this period where I had been drinking and using drugs to cope with, the pain of my dad dying, my divorce, just all these different things. And in that time period, I realized one day that I had been drinking every day for 2, 3 years, doing drugs every day for 2, 3 years. And I had this moment where I realized, like, oh my gosh, I am addicted and I have to do something about this. So I discovered this actually shortly before I'm about to go on a trip to Texas. And one thing about me is I used vacations as an excuse to get extra drunk. So I'm like, I would love to quit drinking right now, but I'm going to go on this trip to Texas, get really drunk. When I come back, I'm going to quit drinking. And so I do that. And I didn't realize how addicted I was at the time. So I come back, I quit drinking, I go through really bad withdrawals. I get really depressed, I get really anxious. I end up trying to take alcohol craving pills. I get back on antidepressants because I had no idea that by drinking and doing drugs every day, what I was doing is I was giving my brain this dopamine, this immediate hit, this immediate release. And then when I took that away, my body was like, what the heck's going on? We need that. And so that causes you to, get really withdrawn, depressed, anxious, all these different things. And so at the time, I have a really good therapist. I'm, telling her about this. And she suggests that I go to AA. And I am high key offended. I'm like, you think I'm somebody that needs AA? Like, how embarrassing not doing that, right?
Yeah.
And so, probably about 3, 4 months after I quit drinking, at the time I was working in the corporate world, I was doing HR. And I was supposed to go to a business dinner. And I ended up having to tell my boss, hey, I actually quit drinking because I had a drinking problem. And I can't go to this dinner tonight and not ruin my life and get wildly drunk and ruin my sobriety. So here's the deal, I can't come. And that was hard, right? I felt so much shame and embarrassment around that. And of course, my boss had no problem with it. I mean, what do you say when somebody says it other than like, yeah, you probably shouldn't come? And so that night I ended up going to AA. And if you're curious about how bad of a drinking problem I had, I actually started going to AA on a Wednesday, not even like a weeknight or not even a weekend, a holiday, like just a Wednesday, right? That's how, bad my addiction is. And so I'm like, okay, since I can't go to this, work function where there's going to be alcohol, I'm going to go to AA. I'm going to get my addiction under control, right?
Yes.
So at the time, I'm so angry because I didn't want to be the kind of person that was addicted. I didn't want to be the kind of person that needed AA. I just felt so much shame and embarrassment around that, right? So I am just angry driving the whole way to AA. Like, oh, I can't believe I have to go to AA. I can't believe I'm addicted. Like, life is so unfair. God hates me, all these things. And then I get to AA and I'm still angry and I'm like, we could leave. Like, I could literally just leave. Nobody would ever know that I almost needed AA and I was almost one of those AA people. And like, I could just go home, right? And somehow I muster up the courage to walk inside, to sit down at like the door, the seat closest to the door. And I'm still like, I could leave and nobody would even know that I came. And while I'm having this like internal battle, the meeting starts and I'm like, oh, well, now I'm pretty committed because like if I leave now, it's way more embarrassing than like just staying, right? So I did this little prayer on the way to AA because at this point in my life, I'm giving God a try again. And I'm like, hey, God, if this is like something that you need me to be doing or a place you need me to be, like, please show me, that this is something I should do. So I go into this meeting, anger sitting in the back row, and this meeting, everything that was shared, I needed to hear. Everything that everybody said, I was like, oh my gosh, here's finally a place where people understand and get my addiction and the challenges, and other people can relate, and other people have the same challenges, and other people are working through the same things I am. Like, I literally just sat in the back and cried the whole meeting because I was so angry, but excited, but confused, but happy to have found people who could relate to what I was going through. Just all these emotions are coming up. And so I'm like, okay, turns out I need to be one of these AA people. So I end up getting really invested in the program, working the steps, sharing my story. And as I'm doing this, I had, kind of started writing this book. I had started this podcast also called It's Only Embarrassing If You're Embarrassed. And I just start sharing about, these different things that I've been through. And other people are like, oh my gosh, I've been through the same thing. I start going to a women's AA group. I realize there's a tons of other women that struggle with addiction, with alcoholism, with just these difficult things. And so I get really candid talking just about my journey with addiction, how I got into AA, and also how much getting into AA has changed my life trajectory for the better, because I think that if I had not gone to that meeting that night, I wouldn't have been able to stay sober. I wouldn't be talking to you right now because I'd be drunk somewhere. And there's just so many ways that God will just, kind of give you the resources that you need if you just ask for them in life. Um, that's another thing that I talk really candidly about. I have a little note on my cover. It says, God is good even when life isn't. And whenever I first got back into faith, I expected God to be a genie in a bottle, right? I'm like, hey, God, if I grace you with believing in you, you need to make my life perfect instantly. And if not, you're not real, right? Because I have this delusional view of what God is or what God should be for me. And I think that if I believe in God, my life should be perfect. And if it's not, then there's no God. And I couldn't understand that God could be good even when life isn't. And also, at this point, I'm really bad in addiction. I'm really bad, in depression. And I've been self sabotaging for a really long time. But instead of acknowledging, like, hey, maybe it's me, maybe I'm self sabotaging, instead of acknowledging that, I am blaming God because I don't want to take accountability, because I can't, because it's too painful, because I'm not ready, whatever the reason is. So I would say I'm very candid about my journey in addiction, kind of in a funny way, where I just tell some stories of some of the things that I did when I was in addiction, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I didn't realize how addicted I was, because that's kind of just how addiction is. It just overtakes your mind and your life. And so if you want to learn more about addiction, if you want some funny stories about addiction, if you want to hear about overcoming addiction, that is a huge theme throughout my book.
Very well said, Miss Madison, and thank you for sharing your story to the world. And before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening. According to my ranking tops in the last 30 days, because in Jamaica, number 3 on the Apple chart, Cameroon at number 5, Zambia number 26, Cambodia at 31, Taiwan at 43, Japan at 49, Malaysia at 66, Malawi at 29, Uganda at 15, and many more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Miss Madison Daniels. So, Miss Madison, at what age did you realize that you're good in writing?
Ooh, about 2 years ago. So I always thought I had to be one of those people that had like a conventional corporate job and, did that sort of thing. But really, I was never fulfilled by that. And so I started writing and journaling, in my late 20s. And whenever I kind of started this diary brain dump, I was kind of getting these pings to turn it into a book. And I was like, nobody would read this. And then I went back and read what I wrote, and I was like, hang on, this is like kind of funny and relatable. And it was a big moment of imposter syndrome, because I think sometimes we have these gifts and we don't realize that we have these gifts because we don't think that we're good enough, or we think that other people are better, more established than us, whatever that looks like. So really it wasn't until recently. And even when, I decided to publish the book, I was still like, oh my gosh, what if people hate it? What if it's not good enough? And so that has been, a really big moment of growth within this as well, is like embracing the fact that this is a new gift that I didn't know that I had, that, now that I've realized that I have it, there's so many different ways that I can use it. I definitely want to write another book in the future, but I would definitely say, it's okay to realize you have gifts later in life, because there are a lot of gifts that I have not realized that I had, until my, late 20s, early 30s. And people, when you're 15, 18, like, what do you want to do with your life? And you're like, I have no idea, And so if you don't know, just, keep doing the things that, bring you to life, that bring you joy, and you'll eventually find, what your path is. And if you're not sure if that's, writing, literally just do whatever you write, whatever you want to write about. It doesn't have to be about you. It could be about fantasy. And, you really could just write, and then, kind of feel like, is this aligned for you? Do you enjoy it? When you write it, when you read it back, do you cringe or do you love it? All of those sorts of things. So I love that question, because I think sometimes people just, come into the world thinking like, this is what I'm born to do, and then ends up being something different. And that was certainly the case in my life and my journey with writing this book.
Yes, indeed, so Miss Madison. What's the most rewarding aspect of being an author?
I would say being able to, and I would say in this case, being able to embrace your own story, because there are a lot of things that I write about in this book that I was so embarrassed and ashamed about whenever I was going through them. And so I think if you're going to write a book that talks about your story, you really have to learn to embrace that, and to not worry about what people are going to think, and just trust that, like, if this is something you're supposed to do, that it's going to work out. Because as I was kind of talking about imposter syndrome, there were a lot of times where I was like, oh, I don't need to publish this book. I can just like keep it as this like healing project that I did. I tried to talk myself out of it so many times. And it took me so long before I realized, like, oh no, this is like actually something that I'm supposed to be doing. And once I embraced that, brought it to life, it just became so fun and so fulfilling. And I think that's a really big part of the journey.
What books or authors are you currently reading or recommend?
Yeah, I'm actually reading this book about people pleasing by Joyce Meyer. And I really enjoyed Joyce. I'll tell you a quick little spiritual awakening story, but I stumbled upon Joyce because I was actually, she's a female preacher if you're not familiar, but I stumbled upon her when I was at a point in my life where I did not believe in God. And so I actually used to go to the gym, run on the treadmill in the morning before work. And every morning I would go to the gym, I would get on the treadmill, and I'd watch reruns of the Kardashians, right? And so
Mm.
one day I come in, the Kardashians aren't on, and this woman preacher's on there. And I'm like, oh, what an inconvenience. And so she ends up talking about this season in the Bible called the wilderness season. And in this season, you're, just really going through a time where you don't understand what's happening. Life doesn't make sense. Life's really hard, but that's the season where you grow. And, everybody goes through the season at some point. And it was exactly what I needed to hear in the moment, right? So I leave the gym and I'm like, that was weird. And then all of a sudden she starts popping up like on my podcasts, like on my Facebook, and like everything she shares I needed to hear was so relatable. And so I slowly started to listen to her more, start to read some of her books. And I love the way that she kind of talks about faith in a very unconventional way. She talks about the Bible, but she more talks about life experiences, what she's learned, and how she's learned to put the Bible into act. And people pleasing is something that I've always struggled with. Again, kind of with that imposter syndrome, or just wanting people to like me or worrying about what people think. And so that has been a really cool one to just kind of unpack by somebody that I just really admire and look up to, as far as just their journey with faith goes.
Definitely, Joyce Meyers empowers lots of women all over the world. So, Miss Madison, how has the publishing process been for you? Any insights or surprises?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. It was a lot more work than I expected. The one thing that I did not expect that took me a ton of time is the amount of different formats you have to have your book in, your cover in. So, in order to have an ebook, you have to have one format. In order to have a paperback book, you have to have a different format. Then you have to have different cover titles that fit these. You have to have, the images sized different ways. And that was something I had no clue about. And so I had to go back and forth with like some different online resources with my illustrator and be like, hey, sorry, I actually need this. Hey, sorry, I actually need these dimensions. I had to, just try a bunch of different things in order to make that work. And I would say one of the most fun parts about it was the people that I got to work with in the process, because it's so cool to, kind of start this project and then have these people help you bring it to life. And whenever I actually got like my first paperback copy and I like touched it, I was like, ah, it's real, it's here, how exciting,
Yes, the feeling.
Yes. So I would say, definitely like the amount of formats and different things like that you have, depending on where you want to publish it and how you want it to show up. That was a surprise for me. And honestly, it probably took me a day, 2 days just to, format different things, reach back out to different people, just to get it to a point where it could actually be published. So that was, again, my first book, self published. And so I was not really familiar with what the process was going to be. And so it was really just like learning step by step, like, oh, shoot, I got to do this now. All right, let's figure out how to do it. And we're so fortunate that nowadays, if you want to do things like that, you can Google anything and find the resources that you need out there. And so that's what I was able to do, is just a lot of, okay, I don't know how to do this. Let's figure it out and let's make it happen. And in that, you build so much like strength and courage. You're like, wow, I really can, publish a book, do hard things, all these different things. So it was really, really cool just to go through the process and watch it come to life.
Yes, indeed. Google and YouTube University. But before we go on, Miss Madison, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, or my fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chefs in one of the five-star restaurants in downtown Toronto. Please do listen our upcoming episode. We're gonna talk about our Food 101 Volume 12, Italian cuisine, and plus one more Food 101 Volume 1 until 13 is only the books that you need how to create a delicious food, available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Miss Madison, what inspired you to become an author?
I would say the desire to normalize the things that I went through. So, whenever I was in these periods, of dealing with mental health, of dealing with addiction, I thought I was the only one. I didn't realize that there were other people out there that had dealt with the same things that I had or had been through the same things. And once I started to, share a little bit at a time, I would have people, reach out, hey, I've been through this similar, or hey, this thing happened to me, or hey, this was really relatable. And I was like, wait a second, other people actually can relate to some of these things because I'm actually not alone and other people have actually been through these same things that I have been through. And so really this kind of desire to normalize all these challenging things that I went through, that was a big factor. And then also just the desire to share how faith can help you overcome addiction and mental illness. And that's a really common theme of my book, as I talk about how I was able to overcome addiction and mental illness once I started to give faith a try and give my life over to God and give all these different areas over to Him. And that was really cool to watch unfold just in my life. And then to be able to write about, all those things and how it happened, was just so cool. And also such a good, part of the healing process as well. So I would say really just the combination of, relatability, inspiring, healing, all of those things are really what, kind of caused me to write this book and then to end up publishing it.
Well said, Miss Madison. So if you go back and give advice to yourself when you were first starting out as a writer, what would it be?
That's a good one. I would have done a more strict outline. So I kind of had this brain dump, and then from the brain dump, I had to then go back in and create an outline and figure out like how do I fill this in and make it a book. But I think whenever I go to write my next book, I will definitely be starting with an outline as far as chapter breakdowns. What do I want to talk about? What do I want to include? What do I want to allude to? What is definitely off limits? And really kind of break that out. And I think that would help just to also, have like, hey, here's different stories I want to tell, different things like that. So I would definitely say, outline, really a lot of brainstorming and kind of having that before you start the book, I think would have been a lot more helpful than kind of doing it backwards the way I did it. So that's definitely something that I want to do in the future.
Yes, indeed, and congratulations. It's only embarrassing if you embarrass. How did you come up with the title of your first book?
So it's actually the same title as my podcast. And I came up with it really just because during these times I was carrying around so much embarrassment, so much shame, so much pain. And I was really embarrassed of my story. And when I started to embrace it, I realized I get to choose if I want to be embarrassed by my story or not. Because embarrassment is something that only we choose and only we feel. And if you choose to not be embarrassed by your story and to embrace it instead, you can literally choose to say this story or this thing about me isn't embarrassing. It's just a part of my past. It's something that I learned from. It's something that I grew from. And so, really, just I started to embrace this kind of saying in my own life. And then I would, say it to people and people would be like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I love that." And I was like, "Okay, like this is something that other people can relate to." I kind of like coined it as like a saying in my life. And then I was like, "Let's, make a podcast, let's make a book, let's name them all the same thing." And, a lot of people have been able to relate to it, which I love because again, like normalization and relatability is a huge part of what I'm trying to do is just to make people feel like they're not alone if they're struggling with mental health, with addiction, with maybe turning their back on God and then trying to get back in line with Him, just all these different things I just want to normalize and, just help people with.
Very well said, Miss Madison. Speaking of book, please grab a copy of my latest book of Book 101 review. I did volume 3 already, people. Book 101 review, volume 1, highly recommended. Book 101 review, volume 2, suggestions, and Book 101 review, volume 3. Please do grab a copy, available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Miss Madison Daniels, can you please invite our listeners to support your book and your podcast?
Yes. So my book and my podcast are both It's Only Embarrassing If You're Embarrassed. The book is available on Amazon, an ebook and paper copy. My podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can find me on Instagram at Your Internet Bestie Mads if you want to DM me, follow along, or see what my day to day is like.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Madison Daniels because if you support her, more books to come. Is there a follow up for this book, Miss Madison?
So I would like to try to come out with another book within the next year. And so really it would kind of be like the evolution of this book. So where I've been since this book, lessons I've learned since this book, and really how my faith journey has deepened. So definitely next book is going to be more geared towards recovery, faith, and therapy and where I've been since this last book. And so probably will not be for another year or so, but definitely an intention to write that second book.
Looking forward to it. So it's only embarrassing if you're embarrassed. Is this book is to empower women all over the world.
Absolutely.
I read this book by Kara Cooney, When Women Ruled the World, Six Queens of Egypt. In Egyptian time, women reigned supreme. In the 21st century, how would women reign?
Women would reign with, I would say, emotional intelligence and communication, and really being able to build relationships. Because I think if you're able to build relationships, you're really able to just do so much more and accomplish so much. And that's really just, a great skill set that women have, is just being able to be these, great communicators, great facilitators, great relationship builders. And that's, something that makes business women really successful in business. And there's just all these women that are, just breaking more and more glass ceilings and really showing all the capabilities that women bring into the workforce, into the world, and all the ways that women really can, reign overall.
Very well said, Miss Madison, and thank you for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much. It was so great to chat with you today. I really appreciate it.
Morgan people, see you soon.